All right. It says we're live. It's my first. For those who are watching this, this is my first live stream ever. Oh, wow. I got a link to it. Okay. I'm going to post this link on Twitter. And so, okay, hold on. I'm going to post this on Twitter. This is my first live stream ever. Come join in for discussion with John Fisher 2.0. And yeah, let's do some open Q&A. Okay. All right. And take the tweet and share it amongst your friends as well.
Oh, my mic was muted there. Okay, I retweeted it, gave it a heart like, and I think we're good. And thank you, Alan, for having me on again. It's a real treat.
Well, it's a treat having you on. And so since it's my first live stream, it's kind of like ad hoc, right? We're just going along with it. We're first going to talk about John's recent debate with Father James on Apostolicae Curiae. In other words, are the priest of the Anglican Church priests? Or
spoiler, they're not.
Spoiler, they're not. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do. Oh, we've got our first customer, Pedro Jr. Hi, Pedro.
Hola, Pedro. I shouldn't have assumed you were Hispanic, Pedro. I'm sorry.
So yeah, that's what we'll do. And then maybe if Pedro or someone else watching, we've got quite the Catholic Crusader Deus Vault.
Hoorah.
Okay, I don't know how to make someone a moderator.
I do not know either.
Because I definitely, from Mexico City.
Oh, Pedro is?
No, that's Hercule Flambeau.
Oh, I see.
Hercule, I've never been to Mexico City. I've only been to Tijuana. But your recent archbishop did some nasty stuff. He came out in favor of sodomite unions, and of course, following the lead of a certain cleric in the church who will remain nameless. Hey, Alan, Catholic Crusader Deus Volt. Hey, Alan, how are you doing, brother? Merry Christmas. Well, Merry Christmas to you, Catholic Crusader Deus Volt. Wonderful city. I'll have to come there sometime. Hercule. Yes, he did. Yeah. So, okay. So guys, if you got any questions, just post them. Hold on. I'm trying to see how I can. Oh, there. That's what you do. What part of Northern Australia you from there, Skylar? All right, whatever you want. Okay. Maybe we should just do open line Q&A. All right, let's talk about the debate. Okay, if you got any questions. Oh, Brisbane. I met someone from Brisbane in 2008. I was in Finland, and I was in Finland, a town close to the Arctic Circle, and I met a guy from Brisbane, and yeah, a guy from Brisbane, a guy from England. I still got the guy on Facebook, and we were talking to a nice Russian lady because it's right next door there. Ksenia Mitrofanova. Yeah. So okay, let's talk a bit about the debate, and guys, just keep feeding the questions, and I will. Your mother's Finnish. Wow, impressive. All right. So it's the first time doing this. You can tell how unorganized I am. All right, John, talk about your debate with Father James.
All right. For those of you who are interested in seeing me debate, you could find it in two places. One is a channel called Irresistible Truth. It's the most recent one. And you'll find me and Father James going back and forth on this issue. This is the video and audio production, the original one. So there you're actually going to be able to find a PowerPoint slide right at the beginning, which should help you follow along in the argument that I provide. But if you're someone who's more interested in like the audio only, you think you could follow along fairly simply, on my channel, John Fisher 2.0, you can find the audio only version of the debate as well. Now, the debate between Father James and I felt was pretty good in a few respects. One, I thought that we were very cordial with one another. The second respect is I felt that the argument I provided was interacted with more or less, but one of the detractions I'd have to give it is I felt we were a little too bogged down in peripheral issues. So, for example, a lot of time was devoted to the history of the encyclical. And while that is important in certain respects, I don't think it's necessarily the the thing that makes or breaks the arguments in the encyclical. Even if you want to say it was like the most corrupt process ever, an argument is either true or false. It provides a sound and valid line of reasoning. And if the premises are true and the argument is valid, the conclusion follows. So I thought that that was a little distracting. As to the Church of England and her theology, well, that was important in addressing whether or not the right contradicted Catholic teaching. The form was not really a make or break issue concerning their own personal theology. It could have been the case they believed exactly the same things as Catholics believed, but because the form of the ordinal was bad, it would still be considered invalid. Do you want to take some time to talk about what makes a proper and improper form?
Well, like I think for that, people can actually go and watch the debate. I'll put the
Okay.
link in. What was the guy's name who hosted?
Irresistible Truth.
Okay, yeah, that's a good guy. That's a good guy. We chatted while you guys were debating. Yeah, for that, people can go to the debate. So just talk about what you. Well, okay, I got a question for you. When did you first meet Father James?
Believe it or not, it was like 3 or 4 years ago on Google Plus. That was back when he was seminarian James, and we met through a mutual friend who was British, who was a Catholic a convert to Catholicism from Anglicanism, and I was introduced to Father James, and it was actually in that discussion where we started talking about some of the basics of Calvinistic theology, things like that. Um, and then he introduced me into his blog site, Barely Protestant, and I'm like, okay, this is clever. He believes in a lot of Catholic leaning positions. I think he would actually be a fairly good ally. And over time, me and James had developed kind of a friendship, although we never really touched on debate too strongly. Then he started talking a lot of I'll just say ish, about Pope Leo and the encyclical and how terribly bad the Catholics got the position on Anglican ordination. And at a certain point, I was like, you know what, that's it. I'm taking up the gauntlet here. So I started going into it. We actually had a debate before this one about the intent. And I'd actually say that he won that first debate. Although in the second debate, I'd actually give myself a pat on the back and say, I think I think my argument still held up, and I don't think the justifications given were satisfactory. I'd be happy to go in a little more there, but I think overall, that's how our friendship developed, and that's how my personal interest in this specific issue also developed as well.
Oh, we've got a ton of questions coming up. All right, I put the first one on there. I've got one from Pedro Jr. and Hurcool Flambeau once we're done this. So take 1 or 2 minutes and okay, I'll just read it. I have a question. I've seen some other trads say that the Novus Ordo Sacrament of Orders is invalid because it comes under the same condemnation as Anglican orders re apostolicae curiae.
Okay.
Hey, John.
Okay, that's a very good question. So a couple of things. First, there are usually two main schools of argument. One comes from an attack on the ordinal and the ordination of the priest, and the other one of the bishop. So when it comes to the ordination rights of the priest, that one's actually fairly easy to defend. Like, it's not really a good objection. The one change that's made is like an and in the Latin. And an and is not really much of a change. Basically, they replace it with a pause, and it doesn't really seem to affect it that much. If you read The Order of Melchizedek by Michael Davies, he actually devotes some time in the appendix to refuting that point. The people who usually bring it up are what are the people from Vatican I Catholic. They make more of a bigger deal about this, but in reality, it hasn't really changed. The form is still the same, and the form is what's essential here. Now, when it comes to the ordination of the bishop, that's a little different. When the new form came out, it wasn't exactly. Basically, a lot of trads, Sedevacantists, most notably Father Cicada, his claim was that there was no longer any reference to the order of the priest, but in the form. And there are two ways to signify the priesthood. One is the office, and the second is the power of the office. What they said is signified by the form is governing spirit, and it's actually the same word that's used in the apostolic constitutions, as well as the Coptic form. Now, the Coptic form also references the power of the order as well, and that's how Father Cicada kind of gets out of saying that one is considered invalid. But something to keep in mind is when you read something like Rome e Canterbury, or when you actually read the response from the English bishops, they actually italicize governing spirit as signifying the form of the ordinal alongside the power of the form. So that's also in there. And on top of that, Pope Paul VI kind of narrows down the form to governing spirit alongside what's immediately following. If you actually read all the words where the hands are being laid on, it also speaks about appointing priests and princes to the sanctuary. Of course, what is a prince other than a bishop? A prince just means something like a leader or someone who's considered first or primary. And even if there was only just priest, even a priest is somebody who can only be ordained by a bishop. So it seems on both fronts, one can honestly make the case that that's considered to have a good form as well. And now the second point is that it brings up an invalid intent, just like it was intended to do by the Anglicans. You know, an invalid intent in terms of ordaining somebody to the office of priest who isn't a priest. But even that's not the case. You can't really do that with a change of an ut, and it's only judged based on the manifest intent, as Pope Leo said in the encyclical. However, there doesn't seem to be any manifest intent. The closest thing you get is a bunch of hearsay evidence, but that's easily dismissible. It's not.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I've got sorry to cut you off, but we got questions coming in. What is the main difference between Catholics and the Church of England?
It depends on which Church of England, because the dynamic there changes from super liberal Protestant types to Calvinist evangelical types to more Catholic than the Pope types. And when I say more Catholic than the Pope types, I mean basically they're trying to say that there's absolutely no difference between the Church of England's beliefs and Anglican and the Catholic Church. In fact, the Tractarians, who were high church Anglo-Catholic, self-described Anglo-Catholics, they actually argued that the 39 Articles could be harmonized with the teachings of the Council of Trent, which no, they can't. like that was what Cardinal John Henry Newman actually tried to argue in a famous piece called Tract 90. And I'll say this much about Tract 90: it is terrible. Like, I love Cardinal John Henry Newman. If you look on top of my desk here, there's a huge photo of him. But like, to me, that just demonstrated the ability of a great mind to hold two contradictory opinions. Like, he later went from that, but the 39 articles, just to give you some reference, they actually condemn the masses as fables. They like Anglo-Catholics like to say, no, they're condemning the straw man of the Catholic Mass. But like, there's, in my opinion, there isn't much justification for that position.
Okay. Here's another question. I'm gonna tackle this one if you don't mind. Hey guys, keep the questions coming. These are good questions. If you got a question about Anglicanism or sacraments or things like that, this guy's your guy to go to. You know. Okay. Why do many? I think that's mainly online Orthodox make such a big deal of essence energies. Let me tell you something. The people, okay, for example, if you're on Twitter or on some kind of social media and there's an Eastern Orthodox person talking about this, you are very, very, you can conclude with a high degree of certainty that they are followers of Jay Dyer. And Jay Dyer is this kind of, I guess you could say, apologist who, you know, he's an ex-Catholic, he's an ex-Calvinist, and he's kind of, but this is his thing. And he can just, I got to give him credit, Jay. If you're watching this, I got to give you credit. You can suck people in with this thing. Like, I watched that one where he converted the Fraternity of St. Peter seminarian. And he's like, yeah, I got hooked on your videos because of the absolute divine simplicity versus the essence energy distinction. So that's why they make a big deal, because they follow it. But I'm going to say a tidbit. If you take a look at all the condemnations, because from the time of the schism till now, they are they come the church, the Orthodox Church, periodically comes out with a list of condemnations of the Catholic Latin Church. So, and this was never on it till the 20th century. The Palamite controversy was an internal Orthodox civil war. It was not a Latin versus Greek thing. And I called Jay Dyer out for a false quote he had made on Gregory Palamas. And he said, he mentioned this in the live stream, but he actually misquoted me. He said, he holds up. See, I'm a student of Palamas. He holds up this book and he says, if the West follows the trek of Barlium, it will become atheist, and it happened. But that's not what he says. He says if you follow the trek, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, if you follow the trek of Barlium, you'll become atheist, or you're in danger of becoming atheist, depending on the quote. He says, but the point is, Jay Dyer automatically assumes it's the West. This isn't a Latin versus Greek, East versus West conflict. It's an inter-Orthodox conflict. There were no papal legates arguing the Latin position. This was an internal Orthodox. We've never had this problem in the Catholic Church, in the Latin Church. But it happened in their church. They had their answer. Palamas won. And like there's some Catholics who like to bash Palamas. I don't bash the guy. But he's his thing about this essence energy, these Palamite synods, had nothing to do with the Latin/Catholic Church. But now, in the 20th century, this thing got revived. This is called the Neo-Palamite movement. And it's and now it's all people talk about. But if you go to things like the Sigillion in 1583 or 86, I can't remember the year, there's nothing about essence energies. You take a look at the 1848 encyclical signed by 4 patriarchs, 29 metropolitan bishops, not a word. of the essence energy distinction versus divine simplicity, the 1895 encyclical signed by the Patriarch of Constantinople plus 12 or 13 bishops, I can't remember. And that was that post-Vatican I, which reaffirmed absolute divine simplicity. Not a word about this stuff. It's only in the 1220s. And here, hold on, I'm going to show you something. Of course, since the 1500s, there's more players. You got the Lutherans, and we're going to talk about this too, because I know you're going to focus on the Lutherans. They had some dialogues with the Orthodox Church of Constantinople. And in this, do you know how much is devoted to essence energies? There's this vague, like, it's like half a page, not even. And it's only in the third letter. Like, it's barely brought up. Like, this is a very modern thing. And J. Dyer's followers, for the most part, I don't want to sound condescending, don't really know church history that well. And so they're completely bought over into this. But really, and if you're watching this, J. Dyer followers, read the Sigillion. Read the 1848 encyclical, 1895 encyclical. Why isn't it in there? It's not brought up at Florence either, but technically you could argue Florence had a lot of politics involved. So I'll let that go. But anyway, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, from what I understand, Barnum did convert to the Roman Church like after the conflict.
After the conflict.
Yeah, but not during the conflict. And in any case, like a lot of the like sharp contrast between quote unquote absolute divine simplicity and the essence energy distinction. Palamas was a classical theist. He believed in a version of divine simplicity, and there isn't just divine simplicity. There is divine simplicities. Like Scotus's conception was different from Thomas's, and that was different from Palamas. But they
I think
all
we got some lag in here.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yo, John?
Yeah, can you hear me? Huh.
John?
Yep. Yeah, yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Okay, yeah, just finish up what you were saying about the divine simplicity there.
Yeah, I mean, Palamas believed in divine simplicity too. He didn't reject it. In fact, the distinction between essence and energies, some have even argued that it was a form of, not a real distinction, but like Scotus, it was more of a formal distinction. And yeah, he's very harmonizable with Catholic tradition overall. I really think that people are making a much bigger deal out of it than it needs to be, and I think this is just silly Orthodox polemics from the early 20th century.
Yeah, it's very. Yeah, I'm not going to comment any further because apparently I'm frozen.
Yeah, I was the host apparently.
Yeah, host John. John is.
I have commandeered Alan's channel just so I might continue.
Yar, he's a pirate. So why don't you tell them about your new project?
Oh, cool. So I think in terms of my debate with Father James, I'm probably not going to publish anything else or extra. If I want to say anything else about it, I have a chance to do it here. I'm kind of going to move on to a different project related to theology. I'll probably start a little after my current engagement is over at school, but I'm going to focus more on differences of justification between Lutherans and Roman Catholics. From what I understand, there have been ecumenical bridges that have been built up, but both Catholics and Lutherans apparently say that that's more or less of a betrayal of their respective tradition.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure where to go from there exactly, but what I am going to do is first look over some of Paul's necessary epistles to studying this, and the three I'm going to cover are Galatians, Romans, and the third one is going to be Hebrews. Not strictly Pauline, but it's actually very relevant to the discussion. Then I'm going to move. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, according to the Council of Trent, it's one of the 14 epistles of St. Paul.
Oh, okay. They're nice. Wait, is Trent? Wait, did Trent say that authoritatively in the sense that I have to submit to it with will and intellect? Because it's kind of nice to have that mystery solved for me.
I believe it is.
Sweet. Okay, so the Epistle to the Hebrews, I'll cover all three of those, and then later on from that, I'm just going to jump over to Augustine, then Thomas, then Luther, then I'm going to touch on the confessions of the Lutherans, then Trent's response, and I'm going to try to assess what's going on there. Maybe I'll even study some Lutheran Catholic theologians as I go through there, just to make sure I'm on the right path and make sure I understand it as they understand it.
Let me share something with you, John. My dad, to this day, completely lapsed, but he is a Lutheran. And his parents, my grandparents, both died as practicing Lutherans. My mom's side is completely Uniat. That's where I get my Catholic, because she's Ukrainian. So they're all Uniats. So, and very fortunately, I got the Catholic side of that coin toss. So, now so me, I have a stake in this as well. You know, I want to know if my grandparents, and in fact, I've got an old Lutheran Bible from the 1800s in my room over here. Just
nice.
Hold on, I'll go.
Oh, and Starlight at Dusk. I am well aware that that was more or less an ecumenical limp shake of the hand. It probably doesn't really represent both traditions that strongly. I'll definitely concede that much.
Yeah, this is our old family Bible from the 1800s. It's in German.
Cool.
I can't read German, but I've looked up where Martin Luther added the word alone in Romans 3:28. But yeah, no, it's an old book. I love old books. You know,
It was probably the first example of an attempted dynamic translation.
no, I think they were those before, but yeah, that's certainly what it was. Okay, question from Pedro. What does the Catholic Church think about the relational subordination doctrine, where Jesus is subordinate to the Father not ontologically but relationally? Do you want to handle that, or?
Sure. I don't know. So
Okay.
a lot of Trinitarian theology I haven't studied in depthly, but you go on.
Well, from what I understand, it's not. He's not subordinate in his essence. He's equal, but in his role, he's subordinate. Like, for example, why does he say the Father is greater than I in John 14:28? But in John 17:5, he tells the Father, glorify me with all your, with the glory I had with you before the world began. And so he's going up back to that equality with God, because it all has to do with the incarnation, how he condescends to help us. And this is talked about in Philippians 2. The doctrine of kenosis. He did not consider equality with God something to be, I'm paraphrasing here, but yeah, just go look up Philippians 2, I think 4 through 13, and it explains all of this stuff. So he went, he condescended, God reached down to us, and then the Son went back up to have the equality with the Father, what he had before the world was even created, from all eternity. That's how I understand that. But what do I know? I could be wrong. All right, keep the questions coming. This is good. Dr. Christopher Malloy wrote a book repudiating the JDDJ. Now,
cool. That would.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That would probably be the ecumenical Lutheran Catholic discussion on justification, if memory serves.
Yeah, I'm curious. Is this Dr. Christopher Malloy? I'm assuming he's Catholic. I've not heard the name. Is he Catholic, Starlight? I'm not frozen again, am I? Let me just.
Yeah, I just Googled him. Dr. Christopher Malloy, PhD from the Catholic University of America. He's been teaching at the University of Dallas since 2001. He approaches the theological vocation philosophically, theologically with faith and reason, serious intellectual research and fidelity to the full deposit of the Catholic faith, work harmoniously towards one end, the contemplation of love and truth. His research interests include St. Thomas, Augustine, Bonaventure, Duns Scotus, and Matthias Gabian. So he does seem like a Catholic theologian steeped in theological historical pursuits.
Wait, wait, hold on. I'm going to send okay, guys, and whoever's watching this, share the link. Share the link on social media, and hold on. I'm gonna just go and share it with someone I know. See if she can tune in. It's a Protestant I know. I'm gonna see if I can. Okay.
Oh, by the way, Starlight Dusk, thank you so much for the heads up. I think this is going to make some good reading, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to waste my Amazon gift card on books really soon.
I've never done that before.
You're a better buyer of books than I am, I believe.
Well, get this. This book, back in August, our good friend Eric Ibarra did a top 10 books on the papacy. And believe it or not, I'd only read one of those books. That's the collected writings of Pope St. Leo the Great. But he's opened me up to like a ton of new authors, including this one. This book is like between $150 and $200. Like now it's listed for $180. I got this for $15 plus $19 shipping. That's Canadian, by the way. Nice. For all you Americans listening. And so like, yeah, no, this is a great book on the papacy. I'm trying to get through his top 10, but a couple of the books are like impossible to get. They're out of print, impossible to find. But yeah, so that's a project I'm doing. I'm trying to read. Oh,
Fairly Protestant.
We got Father James. Oh wait, in fact, I might. In fact, hey, Father James, do you care to join us?
I'll send him the link.
Okay. I've got the link here actually, and I've got Father James on my Twitter. Hold on. If he like, I don't know how many people I can have since I'm not a.
Oh, you could have a lot. I posted 3 myself.
Okay. If you want to join us. All right, Father James, I've sent you the link on Twitter. So, yeah, we want to hear your view of the debate as well. It'd have to be a minute. Okay. So, yeah, he will. Oh, it says I can have up to 5. That's what Pedro says.
Nice.
Okay, so there's a question by Hercule. Thoughts on Protestants in church history? I feel like Protestants want history to be messy, and therefore they can justify their views. James White comes. In fact, before I finished reading that question, I was thinking of James White. Now, it depends which Protestant you're talking to. Protestants are a dime a dozen. They all have different. But the ones that are polemical against the Catholic Church take a handful of views. The James White view is very common. And James White, if he's listening, he really doesn't know church history at all. He says the Arian crisis of the 4th century is so devastating to Catholic ecclesiology. And me, from reading Socrates and Sozomen, especially Socrates, I come to the conclusion that he is the only it strengthened my faith in the papacy. It had the opposite effect. So James White, I'll tell you what, he claims to know church history. He does not read the primary sources. He reads books about the early church written by modern Protestants, and that's all he quotes. In fact, I've got a video on my YouTube channel. I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt.
By the way, Alan, can I take a moment to disagree with you on that point? He doesn't read modern Protestant scholars. He reads early 20th century Protestant scholars on church history, so Philip Schaft and whatnot.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, but it's equally bad, because
Fair enough.
Okay, I do got to concede. I've not read Shaft, save snippets. I've read snippets, but I don't know. Just go and pick up the books. Read Eusebius, read Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret, read Evagrius Scholasticus. I got his book over there. We've got a new question here, though. So, Alan Rowe, in Protestant history, Martin Luther never denies Catholic doctrine. He just doesn't like the way the church is doing things with the money. Yeah, at first that was true. But then he went off the rail with doctrine. He said the Pope was Antichrist. That's part of Catholic doctrine. Like he said, he stopped believing in purgatory. Yes, if you take a look at the 95 Theses, he's still arguing. He still believes in the papacy, indulgences, but not long after that, he starts attacking the doctrine. I've actually read quite a bit of Luther. Looks like we got our bud Father James on. I'm going to add him. Father James, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Good. We spent some time. I don't know if you got to hear that, but
I just started listening about 5 minutes ago.
Okay.
I'll give you a heads up. I said you won the first debate we had, but I gave myself the W with the second debate. Okay. I know that was just my own personal analysis. I hope you don't mind.
I say whatever you want on it. Yeah.
All right.
All right, Father James. How do you think that debate went?
I think it went really well, but I think the problem is that we're realizing that when it comes to the question of, say, apostolic icuri, which your arguments were a bit different from apostolic icuri, but when it comes to the question of holy orders, it branches out into so many different things, especially the Eucharist and what the nature of the Eucharist is. So I think that is something that we'd have to talk about.
Also, another point of divergence is what is the source of sacramentology? I felt that you kept mostly going to John 20 to 23, and to cultivate a sacramentology, whereas I did actually stick to Pope Leo's point on turning towards custom as the rule of law, which is what he says in paragraph 6. And I basically more or less focused on finding patterns in past ordinals and preempting appeals to ordinals that would seem to break this custom.
Well, yeah, and that was another question. I not to rehash the debate, I
no
guess,
worries.
But I've read the many of the ordinals that you're talking about in the past, and they are always sort of like, well, if you look at it and interpret it this way, or if you look at this one other part, or if you use it in conjunction with this or that, where I don't see that charity being brought out to 1552. And the theology, the condemnation then, from your perspective, from what your position specifically, is sort of like, well, Thomas Cranmer said this. And we talked about this after the show, where you seem to be treating Cranmer as more of a theologian than as a liturgist. And it's actually what the church says, that, like, it's the difference between a private theologian versus an actual, and even if he's the one who writes it, the fact is it's the church that uses it rather than specifically. Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing with the Church of England. The Church of England is a national church, so it's a theology more or less dictated by Parliament. Now, in light of that, Parliament didn't actually have like an official interpretation of all the documents itself. So at this point, you more or less have to turn to you would have to turn, in order to give it some sort of definite meaning. If you are going to give it one, you're going to have to turn to public meaning. So how would the average or ideal reader, like the ideal theologian at the time, how would they read and understand the ordinal itself? A, and B, in light of how they would read it, what is the most probable meaning you're going to come to? And of course, authorial intent does have some sort of say in the matter, because Cranmer is writing and stringing along these words for a purpose. Chances are he wants it to at least be compatible with his own theology. So that's going to have to be one. If it's not going to be the interpretation, it has to at least be one that fits into how he sees things. I don't think, given how much leeway he would have had in formulating that, he would have wanted anything to exclude his own theology.
Why does Rome get to have indefinite dogma that they get to just clarify later, but not Anglicanism?
Wait, just pause for a second. You're a tiny bit soft. Do you think so, John? Like, is there a way you can speak a bit louder, Father James?
Like me, or
no?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can.
Yeah. Okay. I've actually got a question for you, Father James.
Well, I want to real quick. I just want to ask.
Right.
Why does Rome get to have indefinite dogma, but Anglicanism has to have everything spelled out to a T at the very moment it's conceived, or else we're going to assume it for them?
All right. No, that is a good question. So the ordination that specifically concerns us is Matthew Parker's consecration in 1559, and now in terms of like having an official set of doctrines and definitions, that doesn't happen until a little later. I think Dick says it's 1963. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We don't actually have at this point where we have to assess the ordination, which is very prevalent, the definite meaning. So we do have to make do with what we have. If things were spelt, if the Anglican Church actually spelt things out a little earlier, then the argument would be a little different, and we'd have to approach it that way. But in light of that, we have to deal with the documents as is. The 42 articles do help us out. In light of that, we also have to look at everything everyone is saying there at the point, at the time, whose theology is trying to be incorporated here. Of course, the usual explanation is you had two wings, the more conservative wing and the more reform-minded wing. So that had to fit both in there. So if both of these theologies were allowed to coincide with one another, and you have to make some kind of judgment, and the only thing you're going to come to is indeterminacy, so both can fit there, or the reform wing wins. Like in two out of those three, and if either of those outcomes obtain, then that's going to be an issue at the very least for Parker's ordination. Now, notice I didn't come into any question about everything in 64, because more or less everything was spelled out at the time. We could have discussed it then too, but that wasn't really my focus. I was just concerned with those 100 years. And if Rome does need time to clarify something, if some kind of validity hinged on something being clarified after the fact, and everything was indeterminate then and at that point, then you'd have a point. But in this specific case, the ordinal and the ordinal, the rite, the liturgy, that came out first, and then the theology came out second.
Well, the 42 articles were not actually in place when Parker was consecrated, though.
Okay.
Right.
So is it okay if I ask Father James something? What was that book you showed during the debate about apostolicae curiae?
I've shown a few. I probably the one you're thinking of is actually I still have it right here. Absolutely Null and Utterly Void by John J. Hughes. He was an Anglican who became Roman, but he was the first one in at least since Apostolicae Curiae who was actually conditionally ordained.
And that was because of the old Catholic ordinations that took place after. And in fact, I think that any Anglican priest or bishop who can trace their lineage back to those old Catholic ordinations, because those priests definitely had a kind of intent when using the formula that would have been unbounded as compared to their Anglican brothers or sisters. And because of the fact that the encyclical never touched on those definitely do deserve to be conditionally ordained. I think on that I'd take Cardinal Basil Hume's position, who was more receptive to a conditional ordination.
Okay, I got a question for you. You got a question on the screen, Father James. Maybe take a couple minutes and answer this one.
Yeah. So, what would it take for you to join Rome? I get this question a lot, and it would take quite a few things. So, I guess you could sum the big part up into me being convinced of everything that the papacy saying being true about itself. I mean, obviously in a dogmatic fashion. I do study church history, and I do obviously study scripture as a priest, and the more I study both, the less I'm convinced, or the more I'm convinced that it's not the case, and the less I find any reason to believe that the papacy is what it claims itself to be, especially within Vatican I. I mean, if you look at the language of Vatican I, where it's talking about how all the venerable fathers held to this, and concerning papal supremacy, papal infallibility, the fact that an ecumenical council cannot overturn the rulings of the papacy, like that's just not what church history shows or allows. So I find that to be just incredibly inaccurate.
Okay. We could have a lot of discussion about this, Father James, but perhaps on a specific live stream dedicated to that. That's a good topic. And I saw your debate with I think he was a Catholic. I didn't know who he was on the papacy.
No, Edmund's probably, yeah.
Yeah, and the guy didn't really know too much. He didn't seem to, like, you pulled the quote from St. Gregory of Nazianzen about St. Athanasius, and you're like, this is about a pope. Oh, wait, it's not the Roman Pope. You know that one?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. No. Okay. I'm curious, Father James, have you read this book?
Who's that? All right. No, I've not read that one.
Jallan. He's an Anglican, actually.
Uh-huh.
And it's a whole history of the papacy. I'm just working through it right now. It's a really good book, actually.
I will have to say that I am a fan of Schaff. I have the 37, 38 volume collection. I saw you guys talking about him earlier, and I think Alan or Doctor, right? Dr. Rule?
No, it's Alan.
Oh, just Alan. Okay. I think you said you hadn't read him yet, and then you said though that you didn't like him.
Based on what I've read, I haven't liked him. Like for example, I've got those church father books. He does the introduction to that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like he's got like an 8 or 10 volume church history, and that I've only written certain parts of it. And I think again, based on the parts I've read, I've not read the whole thing. I've not read front to back, even a few volumes. So based on what I've read, of course I'm Catholic, right? So I'm going to have slanted eyes just like everyone. Okay. Okay. On the top, what do you gentlemen? Okay. Do you guys want to tackle this one?
What do you think of branch theory?
Yeah.
Oh, James, would you like to go first, or?
Yeah. So branch theory is often there isn't an official quote branch theory. There are just different types of understandings of it. So the one that I'm most comfortable with is this idea. When it comes to apostolic succession, it is found within a variety of branches that are in schism from each other right now. Schism does not negate holy orders. Schism doesn't negate sacraments. So otherwise would be a Donatism. So if you reject Donatism and if you understand that various branches have schism from each other, then you hold to the branch theory. That doesn't say that all of them are orthodox or anything like that. It's not some sort of, pluralism where it's like we can just all get along. It's just saying Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Anglicans, various forms of Lutherans, Old Catholics, etc., are in schism. They're all part of the church, and those groups all have apostolic succession. That's all that it's saying.
Do you have a comment, John?
Oh, sure. So from what I gather about branch theory, like earlier on, it was kind of a way to show how apostolicity kind of preserves, historically speaking. If you look at Pusey, from what I understand, and of course, because Father James has actually read him, he could interrupt and correct me on this one. But apostolicity kind of survives in the East, in Rome, in the Latin Church, and in England. And these are just God's ways of using his providence to help it survive. Now, in terms of my own personal viewpoint, I find it does do a good job of answering the question of orders, the valid succession of the valid succession of one bishop after another after another. It answers that one, but it doesn't really answer the question of jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is a matter of legitimacy. What gives one? So, for example, if I go to a defrocked old Catholic bishop and he ordains me to the priesthood and to the bishopric, he could do that. He has the power to, and no one, not even the Pope, can say, "Yeah, I'm suppressing this power." That was actually debated at one point, but it was rejected, and for good reason. Now, in light of this, if that is the case, why can't I legitimately hear confession? Why can't I legitimately perform the sacrifice of the Mass? Why can't I get any? Why don't I have the right to any authority aside from the ones that people, opt to give me voluntarily? It's quite simple. Usually, people in the past have understood some means of giving valid jurisdiction legitimacy. If you look at the Roman Catholic Church, it has been through the Pope, and the Pope kind of, if not explicitly, at least implicitly, being okay with all the other patriarchs and delegations of that authority legally. If you look at the Church of England, it was through an understanding of the monarch giving legitimacy to the bishops. If you if you look at the Eastern churches, the same thing was true there too with the emperor. But and while that would have been a good explanation to suffice at the time, I think in this day and age, one of the issues with branch theory is now that we have this vast secularization of people in huge swaths of the world without the state giving any kind of official legitimacy to anyone, what really gives a bishop a right to rule in these places? Just the fact that everyone can just have it up for grabs. I think that in terms of the answer of jurisdiction, branch theory doesn't really answer it that well in the 21st century, whereas it did a really good job of doing that in the early Church of England as well as in the East. But now I think that history is kind of showing that you kind of need a central figure to give it that sort of legitimacy, and a more monarchical model where right now we're seeing national monarchs being done away with for more secular states, unfortunately and regrettably. And I think at the very least with the denigration of the state in that matter, I think me and James would agree on that much, that that's a bad thing. Whereas I think in terms of jurisdiction, we would probably have a different philosophy and approach on that matter.
Just a quick question for Father James here. Is your guest Episcopalian, continuing Anglican?
Yes. I'm actually what's known as I'm part of what's known as the Reformed Episcopal Church, which, don't let it fool you, that doesn't mean we're Presbyterians with a prayer book.
Okay, it sounded like that.
So I call myself a variety of things, but I would say Reformed Catholic as well. There's a lot of Reformed theology I do appreciate, and when I say Reformed theology, I'm not talking about John Piper or John MacArthur. They are not Reformed, even close to Reformed. So yeah, I'm part of the Reformed Episcopal Church.
Okay, I've got a question for you, Father James, and I'm interested in hearing your opinion about this, because from the 19th century up till about 1950,
Mhm.
the Anglicans wrote a lot of books on the papacy. Some, just trying to be unbiased. Some were polemical, like
Mm.
Papalism and Puller.
Well, go
well,
ahead.
My question for you, Father James, is what do you think is the best Anglican book on the papacy?
So Pusey does a few good things on the papacy. I'm trying to remember some of the books that he's written. John Jewell is sort of a quote sort of standard for us, but scholarship has gone beyond what he does today. So that one, Apology of the Church of England, is more of like establishing what the Church of England is as opposed to the papacy.
Hmm.
And I will say this though, the reason I started talking before you finished, was that you were talking about sort of papalism and papist and Romanist and all that as sort of derogatory. That from our perspective, we're not trying to use those in a derogatory fashion.
Oh yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Like we I don't ever just say you're Catholic because I don't believe that you are the entirety of the Church Catholic. Your communion. That's why I will say things like Romanist, or I'll say like Papal Catholic or Roman Catholic.
In fact, you've got a video in your YouTube channel about that, right?
Oh, I do. That's right. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've been watching your channel. Yeah.
By the way, I just want to bring something up. Earlier, somebody asked, what would it take for you to be Catholic or for you to go to Rome? If anyone wants to hear my answer on what it would take for me to go to Canterbury, I think if somebody did convince me of Reformed theology, I think the Anglican Church is probably the best tradition for that.
Oh, we are.
Yeah. In terms of Calvinistic theology, although I think I'd still be debating Father James on the apostolic curiae issue, but I'd be saying we're definitely not priests in the Romanist sense. Why are you doing this?
Well, that's the thing.
I've got that one. I got that same translation.
Yeah.
Beverage.
That's the thing. If we're talking about, because that's one of the things I think needs to be clarified within the Eucharist, because you're claiming that you don't believe in a re-sacrifice at the Mass, the re-sacrifice of Christ in the Mass, but you seem to be arguing that there's another propitiatory sacrifice happening at the Mass. So that would be the re-sacrifice, which is the problem. Which then we would reject what you say. Then sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and actually, if you read, I'm trying to remember his name. There's this, not by bread alone.
I know that. I have that book. Yeah.
Oh, so if I'm trying to remember his name, but there's a specific Jesuit scholar. In fact, he and Jay.
Dyer?
I'm sorry.
Dyer?
No, not Jay Dyer. No, Jay Hughes.
John Hughes.
Yeah, John J. Hughes. Him and John J. Hughes actually went back and forth on this issue. He brought up the fact that the intention was invalid. He wrote something about that, and he wrote a defense about positive exclusive intention. Hughes actually responded to him and said, yeah, but it was because of all the bad formulations. That's what the Anglicans were rejecting at the time. And it kind of delved into that one as well. So in terms of, calling the Mass a propitiatory sacrifice, the question has to be asked, is the Mass itself the same sacrifice as the one on Calvary? Meaning, are we adding an additional sacrifice or an additional propitiation to that? So there's a distinction we make between the application and the sacrifice itself. When we say we make a sacrifice of the Mass, what we're doing is we're taking the sacrifice Christ made on the cross. We are performing the Mass. When the priest says the words of consecration and everything, basically the one sacrifice at Calvary takes on the same time and location as the affairs of the Mass as it is. The sacrifice happens in both places simultaneously. The sacrifices become one and the same in a very real sense. The Eucharist becomes the same victim, who is Christ. The minister enjoins Christ in giving Christ up. Then you have of course you have the sacrificial intent, which is, in this specific case, the remission of venial sins for the living and for the dead. And the fourth thing is, let's see, and the fourth thing is you are affecting a real transformation, meaning that there's an immolation that's going on there where Christ is going from one state to another, specifically the state of being of one body to having his body and his blood separated in the double consecration. So when all these things go on at the same time, what's being done is the same sacrifice made in but being given a new mode. So when we say we're making a propitiatory sacrifice, what we're saying is we're taking the same propitiatory sacrifice at Calvary and giving it a secondary or new mode. This is my interpretation of the Mass. And Trent itself actually gives, now, Catholic theologians actually debate about how exactly to break down the Mass where you don't get a new propitiatory sacrifice, but at the same time, you don't get the issue where it's just a commemoration. So Jesus couldn't be literally present there. He could be present in body and in presence, but he doesn't necessarily have to be sacrificed in a real sense. He doesn't have to be given up for justification for a sin.
But we do obviously believe that he sacrificed for us.
So then the question is, sacrificed in the sense of what? Is he being given up as? And this is where it comes to once more. Is he being before and after the Mass? Is there a sin that you have committed that you have been forgiven for, and that you have been justified in that forgiveness? So if you are going through all that, then you are continuing on justification. Whereas in the past you had Lutherans and Calvinists who avoided that because there was an idea of justification by faith alone. There was one justification, that's done. Justification doesn't continue on afterwards.
It's a bit trickier than that, though.
Which brings me to my next project.
Yeah, I mean, justification is a very complicated theology, especially as so, for instance, like Calvin and Luther did not have the same understanding of justification by faith alone.
That's true. In fact, Calvin, one of the things that I love is there's one thing that Lutherans actually rightly criticize Calvinists over is the fact that Calvinists don't actually believe that faith is the only mode of justification. Calvinists actually accept that there are babies who die, but they still can go to heaven, and they're just justified because they're elect, not because they've been given or imparted a new mode of faith. Whereas Lutherans actually believe faith is, because they believe in baptismal regeneration, is actually imparted at baptism. Hence, infants are only saved by baptism, by faith through baptism. Yeah.
So I think that one of the issues I would say is that there are all these other layers being added on top of apostolic icaria and implications of it from your argumentation.
Which is why I didn't focus too much on intention. I really just wanted to drift away from that into the form itself.
And the form part is the part that I find really odd.
Sorry.
No, I'm done.
I just wanted to ask something about the debate. Is for you, Father James. You seemed to point out at several times in the debate that apostolic curiae had a lot of politics behind it. It was not pure theological motivation. Now, it sounds like it's true based on what you said. I haven't checked it out myself, but wouldn't you say that's no different, though, than the Council of Chalcedon, Nicaea, Florence, probably the ecumenical councils out there had politics behind them.
Yeah. So I would say a few things. So it's not the mere fact of politics, and obviously I'm not saying if there are politics involved that automatically, therefore, it's a false conclusion. But there were a lot of politics behind the commission itself, in fact, it was incredibly to the detriment of the Anglican pro-Anglican side. Half of the people there were explicitly polemically opposed to holy orders, and they were all three men chosen. Well, three of them were chosen by Cardinal Vaughan, and I think two others were chosen by Cardinal Vaughan. One of them had to be chosen basically by the Pope. Like the Pope said, you have to choose this guy, kind of thing. And another one was chosen as like sort of the one to even out that pick. And then the last of the three were French. I think French and Italian, I think it was, and they didn't speak English well, if at all. So it was basically all of the people from England who were anti-Anglican, telling all of the people in that were not from England, this was the theology, and you have to reject them for this. So,
okay.
But my thing is that there was deception going on by them on that part. Yeah.
That makes sense, but I've got a question. How come the Pope didn't stack the commission entirely? Like, it sounds like he stacked some of it. How come he didn't stack it wholesale?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to look into the intentions on his part about it. I couldn't fully answer that. I guess it would seem obvious because Cardinal Vaughan was so obviously anti-Anglicanism. Just like he would call us devils and things like that. He was really polemical.
To be fair, England has had a history of being anti-Catholic. So
anti-Roman at its worst. But even in stuff like, even at our worst, when it came to sort of the what we had in our theology with the litany, our prayer against the Pope was basically from the Pope, deliver us, good Lord. Like that was about the extent, like not may he burn in hell or something like that.
You literally oppressed Ireland. That was an entire Catholic country.
Do you want to go over how many places that Rome has oppressed?
I'm not. So here's the thing. I'm not saying you guys have been oppressive, therefore you're wrong. My only point is, of course, we're going to have people who have bitter feelings. It's a long conflict, and unfortunately, we haven't had a great history of being civil to one another. And God willing, that has to change.
Okay, so to our 11 viewers, keep the questions coming. We've got a question now for the one Protestant here, Father James. How do the guests? Well, there's only one Protestant here, so it's to you. Believe the canon came to be apart from the Church's authority, and can they explain how no one before the Reformation holds to a 66-book canon?
So this would be a good argument against someone who is an evangelical in the modern sense of the term. Historically, Anglicans have not. One of the problems is that there's this idea of sola scriptura, which means basically just me and my Bible under the tree, and like I just get it like the correct theology osmosis. As an Anglican, our sola scriptura is literally just you cannot bind men's consciences to things that cannot be proven from Scripture, like concerning salvation. That's all that means. So we actually would consider the councils authoritative. We would consider the church to be able to determine and figure out the canon. And in fact, we actually have the Apocrypha as part of our canon. It's just a secondary canon. It would be deuterocanonical.
Okay.
And a fun fact, I've actually heard James actually quote from deuterocanonical books as a way of not being the main support of his viewpoints, but just to provide additional support for his viewpoints. So it's not like he disregards the deuterocanonical text as being influential or pertinent to his theology. I've actually given him text referencing Judith as a means of considering his viewpoint on hell, and I even gave him ways that he might interpret it in light of his own personal viewpoints.
That's a powerful book.
Just to add, for instance, in the books of homilies, which are part of our formularies, our confessional standards, we have sermons as part of our confessional standards and a prayer book. It's really odd. But in that, we actually call Tobit, Wisdom of Solomon, and some other books, apocryphal books, we call it spirit breathed, and we call it scripture, and we call it part of the word of God and things like that. Like we'll say the Holy Spirit spoke through Tobit, saying that sort of thing. So we have a sort of middle way in between that, where we do consider it scripture, but it's on a secondary canon.
Okay. All right. We got another question for you, Father James. You're so popular. I got to have you back on. You got all these questions for you. All right. For your guests, given that you are in communion with ACNA, which, like the Anglican Communion, ordains women, what do you think ordaining women does to claims of apostolic succession?
Just to clarify something, it's not actually the entire Anglican Communion that ordains women. It's about, I want to say, half, and that's including the liberal branches that 70% of the communion is not in communion with. So, and in fact, the conservative, that's conservative 70% branch, they don't allow any consecration of women to the episcopate at all. So just that's the first thing, because it sounds like this person is thinking that everyone in the Anglican Communion allows for women's ordination or something like that. That being said, I would say that I'm hearing an echo. That being said, I would say that the ordination of women does not invalidate the holy orders of the bishop, even the bishop who does it, although it is a heresy. Heresy does not negate holy orders. So while that woman would not be a priest, that doesn't mean that the bishop is no longer a bishop and can no longer ordain or consecrate or things like that.
Right. Could I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, sure.
So hypothetically, let's say that you have two male bishops and one female and they're all ordaining another bishop. You would agree that it would still be a valid ordination because 2 out of the 3 bishops have valid orders in that case, correct?
Well, it would seem obvious that that
Yeah.
would be the case. The whole point of it is that the whole reason that we have the 3 consecrating is that just in case 1 or 2 of the lines is broken, you've got that third one.
I see. And here's the second question I have, though. But would you agree if all 3, and I don't think this has ever happened, so this is hypothetical.
Right.
If all 3 were females consecrating another priest to the order of the episcopate, would you say by the end of that there is just the person is just a priest remaining?
Well, a female cannot be a bishop, so it would be a lay.
No. The person, the 3 females are consecrating 1 male to the episcopate.
Yeah, they can't do it. They're lay people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And one last question. Let's say we have a male who was ordained to be a priest by a female, and he goes on to be ordained. Would you say?
Male?
Yeah, by a male.
So that would be a bit I would have to look into it historically and see what happens, but that would be at the very least a conditional ordination. So my big thing is I do not want to absolutely rebaptize, absolutely reordain unless there's a dogmatically assured reason, because
Right.
it would be sacrilege for me, which is why I consider the question of apostolic icaria very important, because when Anglicans who are priests or bishops or deacons or confirmed go into Rome, unless there's a conditional thing or unless it's received, they are committing sacrilege by doing so. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one more thing. In light of that, me and Alan actually had a discussion today with an Eastern Orthodox apologist, and I use apologist in quotes because he's really more of a regurgitator of another person's arguments.
Really?
I hope we're not talking about Craig. Craig is smart.
No.
Craig, no.
His name begins with a J and it ends with an ire. So it's just a hint, but apparently
I wonder who that could be.
It could be anybody.
John Fryer, yeah.
John Fryer, exactly. But in any case, so a friend was confessing that one of the reasons he didn't become Catholic Orthodox because he would have to go into communion with a rite that would rebaptize him, and that was something that was a big no for him. When this regurgitator came out and attacked him, my response was, you know what? Actually, being against Donatism strikes me as a good reason not to be Orthodox. And now, in light of this, I don't think it's a firm defeater myself. Like, if that was me, I'd be like, this is something that really drastically needs to change. But the point was, rather than actually admit that it is a big deal and that it does need to change, and these are valid baptisms, and at no point in the church did we, if they met the valid intent, minister, matter, everything, would be rebaptized based on the beliefs of the minister. And I actually have that sense of importance from you and from this engagement. That's why I was, in part, really interested in this and learned to really sympathize with your position, even though I don't agree. I came to the opposite conclusion.
Just a quick question, Father James. When you say Mass, do you guys have the filioque in the creed?
Yes, we do. Although the new prayer book, the 2019 that just came out in 2019, actually has an allowance for reciting it without the filioque.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, there's a footnote about it, and there's actually been a declaration about how officially we consider it without the filioque to be the original one. But I do not confess the filioque. So
you don't?
No.
Okay, yeah, because in for example, I'm from Uniat stock.
Mhm.
Like my whole family's Uniat, and there's a Uniat church about a 10-minute walk from my house. I've gone there before. It's not my normal church, but they in their prayer books, it's all in Ukrainian, but they got the filioque in brackets. Is that how they do it in your?
Yeah, it's in brackets. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I don't have the 2019 with me, but yeah, I could show you if I had it.
Okay,
Although,
so
what about the
that's kind of
Athanasian?
optional then for Anglican clergy.
What about
It
the
depends on
Athanasian Creed? What about the Athanasian Creed, though? Because I know for a fact that has the filioque in it.
Yeah. So historically, the Athanasian Creed is obviously not from Athanasius himself, and it's a Western one and all that. So here's my position on the filioque. It's not the theology that I'm necessarily opposed to. It is the fact of how it was inserted into it. So in the Athanasian Creed, I wouldn't have a problem with it because that seems to be how it was originally. But it's the insertion that later on happens without an ecumenical council. Not that the arguments from the East about what was it from Chalcedon talking about it, I think. I haven't talked about this in a while. And I wasn't expecting to talk about this, but for me, if it should be something that's ecumenically done, and it's actually shown to be a divisive thing, even if we're pushing that divisiveness after the fact. Like it still is divisive regardless.
You got a question for you on the thing, Father James. Non-liberal Anglican churches aren't found globally. What advice would Father James give when too far from one? Is there a reason to doubt the church with right theology would have geographical obscurities? So two questions.
Yeah. So I mean, the last one I'll take first. I mean, the church was just about only in Jerusalem prior to Pentecost. So, and it wasn't in the New World unless you're like a Mormon or something. It wasn't in the New World for a long time. So I don't think the geological obscurity thing works well. But that being said, majority of Anglicanism is relatively conservative. Far more conservative than what we see in a lot of the Western world, and much more conservative than much of Rome, I would say. So I think that so that's the issue. So for instance, I mean, if you look in Africa, the African Anglicans are incredibly conservative.
Same with the African Roman Catholics as well. Yeah. Man, soon we're gonna find the Africans evangelizing the rest of us.
And, they already are. I mean, in the United States, they are. We actually have 2 dioceses that are formed, 3, I think, actually, that sort of evangelize here, basically, from Nigeria.
Have you read the book? It's by Philip Jenkins.
I know Jenkins, yeah.
He talks about how there's an ecumenical meeting between people from the Church of England and people from the Anglican Church in Africa. And they're like, yeah, you got to understand scripture the way it was said. It's like, oh, no, that's just metaphor. We believe in all this evolution stuff now. And then eventually the guy from Africa is like, so if you don't believe this stuff, how come you brought it to us in the first place?
I've heard stuff like that. My seminary that I went to actually had a lot of Africans from Nigeria, from Kenya, and other places, and they're very nice. But some of them didn't think like not in a mean way, but like just sort of like, man, the United States is messed up. You know?
I am really happy I was raised by an immigrant family, so I was more or less inoculated from the degeneracy of the surrounding culture.
But I do want to go answer the question for the first part that I didn't get to answer yet.
Yeah.
What advice would I give when too far from one? I get this quite a bit because a lot of people are, through my Barely Protestant page and through YouTube and email and stuff, will ask me like, hey, I don't have an Anglican church near me. So what I tend to tell them is find a faithful church that does preach the gospel. I recommend Lutheranism as a secondary after Anglicanism. And I also say, you might like this part, go ahead and look at Rome or look at the East and see what you think of them. And I'll tell them the heresies that I find within both communions and the problems I have. But I'll say, compared to sort of the evangelical stuff, I would say some of the worst of evangelicalism is much worse than what you find in Rome or the East. So.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. We got another one for you from Ryan Pope. Pope Celestine is called the divine successor to Peter, quote, Prince of the Apostles at Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, and all bishops agree, yet Anglicans hold this council as authoritative, question mark. Father James?
Pope Celestine's, oh, okay, yeah. So I don't see the problem. I mean, we hold to the primacy of Peter. We hold to the idea that he is first among equals and his successor is first among equals. So there's this idea that oftentimes that I come across where it's either you basically say Peter actually never existed, he was invented by the papists or something, or Peter is everything that we say about, or Peter and his successors are everything that we say in Vatican I. And I'm like, no, you can say that there's a legitimacy to understanding him as the primus, the primus inter pares, without saying I agree with Vatican I. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Okay. And just a correction on the details. I don't think all the bishops agreed. I don't think they're yeah, but they did not dispute it. So like the papal legates, I can't remember the names of I think it was Philip, I could be wrong, came in and read that statement. And then there was no objection. Then they just continued on with the proceedings.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was the third council. I get the third and fourth mixed up because they both have similar situations that happen where a pope sends a tome and it's actually judged and read in the council itself. So I might be thinking of the fourth, but like they both have similar problems where you have these papal legates coming and trying to throw around their weight, and they're like, no, you're going to sit down and sit in your place, and we're going to judge these things out ourselves.
Well, yeah, they said Dioscorus was not allowed to have a seat, and then they're like, no, we got to try him.
They literally said, like, the Pope says he's not allowed to have a seat. We're going to leave if you give him a seat. And they say, well, too bad. And then they sat down. So, and there's things like that are like why I hold to the why I reject Vatican I. It's you can always put in the little well yes, but they were just going against it and all that, but like they're going against it so many times that it seems to be that's what was understood. And go ahead.
Maybe I should have you on, Father James, for like an entire papacy alone discussion, because there's some good things we could talk about. I've got a question. Have you read this book?
Is that Duffy? Let me see.
Venerable Bede.
Oh, Bede. Yeah, I've read Bede before. Yeah.
What do you think of it? Because I mean, he gives a pretty Catholic description of England. I think this is pretty hard to square with Anglicanism, or maybe of a different view.
Well, so there's a problem where there is this talk oftentimes about the sort of Celtic Church versus the Roman Church, and you might think that I sort of hold to something like that. Maybe.
No.
Okay.
I'm not saying that. I'm just asking you your opinion on Venerable Bede's.
Yeah. History. So he's polemical against what we would today call like the Celtic Church and all that sort of stuff. The people prior to King Oswy and Synod of Whitby and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because that put the Celtic Church. Well, that's only a small part of his history, though.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
there. It's true.
Yeah, no, but my point being that here's my thing. It is impossible to deny that at one point the church in England was under Rome. Like, no, I would never deny that. But the question is whether the understanding of the papacy is legitimate. And I would say that, especially given Vatican I, it is not legitimate. If you look at Unum Sanctum and all those sorts of things, it's not legitimate. So that would be the problem.
Oh, we need to have you back on, Father. Guys, this has been. It's been an absolute pleasure. Are there any more questions? Because I'll put them on. If not, I'll wrap it up. But I'm just going to say I've had a lot of fun. I didn't expect to have you here, Father James, and I've not met you before this, besides maybe the odd social media comment. But yeah, like I'm definitely going to have both of you on again, perhaps together, perhaps individual, because yeah, there's not many people, at least in the West, stand up for Anglicanism these days. I mean, I'm curious. Are you familiar with a guy named Michael Corin?
I might be.
Okay.
I'm not really familiar now.
Okay, don't look him up. You wouldn't like him. But I mean, he's a Catholic, or was a Catholic, staunch Catholic apologist. And then he became
Canadian.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a talk show guy.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
I do know. Yeah.
Yeah, and he became Anglican because they're softer on LGBT issues.
Huh. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I know. Yeah, and
Yeah.
well, yeah, that guy's a lost soul.
I liked a lot of what he said. He seemed really fair because he had William Lane Craig on at one point and some others.
Yeah, that was back in the day when he was good.
Oh, okay.
Since about 2015, he's gone completely off the deep end. He's radically pro-choice now. He attacks pro-lifers.
Oh, actually, fun interaction I had with Michael Corin during yeah, it was actually during a Twitter discussion. He actually brought up the fact that this is what we need. He on a Twitter conversation, he brought up, in order to fight abortion, what you really need if you're really pro-life is all these social programs and sex education. And I brought up the fact that actually, if you compare the numbers per capita between Canada and the United States, even though we have more social programs and more sex ed.
Sorry, I
no worries.
got cut off.
No worries. Just to rehash really quickly. So Michael Corin was basically saying, if you're really pro-life, you're going to followed by a list of liberal demands such as universal health care, sex education, all that. I actually pointed out, actually, no, if you look at the numbers per capita, Canadians and Americans seem to have similar abortion rates, despite the fact that we actually have more of those social programs. So that doesn't seem to be a factor. Come later, I found out he blocked me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, he's blocked me too. He blocked my friend Jackie Shea. He's a very nasty guy. I think he's genuinely become a worse person.
That's sad because I really liked him from what I did see of him. He had a creationist on with an evolutionist and had William Lane Craig and all that. He did this really nice. It seemed like a pretty relatively conservative as far as Canada goes. But actually, if it makes you feel better, Dr. James White has me blocked. So.
I'm jealous.
Wow, how did he block you? Like I'm not even blocked by him.
I don't remember. It was about like 7 years ago. And it was something to do with annihilationism. Yeah. It's really weird. I think he's okay. This is not me knowing secret knowledge. This is just me like talk or listening to what he has said about the issue. I think he realizes that annihilationism is biblical, and he is unwilling to make that jump because he would have to get rid of the London Baptist Confession, and he is holding to the London Baptist Confession over annihilationism and what Scripture teaches about it. So,
far be it for me to agree with you on this one because I'm not an annihilationist, obviously. But if that was the case, it would be pretty ironic considering he's Mr. Sola Scriptura.
Yeah. It's really funny. I've been listening. For some reason, I've been listening to him a lot recently about baptismal regeneration and the sacraments, and I'm just like, he does not understand sacramental theology at all. He'll blame other people for it. Like, well, like for instance, he'll talk like he refuses to debate Lutherans anymore, and his argument is like, well, you can't read everything Luther's written. I'm like, you can read what the Lutherans believe. It's called the Book of Concord. It's like that's their official statements.
You also have the Luther's Small Catechism.
Exactly. So it's just he kind of refuses to understand sacramental theology, and he basically holds to, if you hold to baptismal regeneration or the salvific power of the Eucharist, your works-based salvation, which is such an idiotic thing to say. And I consider him an intelligent man, and I have respect for him because he's someone who helped bring me back to the faith. But he does not understand sacramental theology.
Saint Augustine, the Church Fathers, Martin Luther, all works-based theology.
Yeah.
So, John, I kind of want to wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Father James, for joining me. I think I have to download it and upload this onto my channel. I think that's how it works. I could be wrong, but John, do you want to close with a word of prayer?
Yeah, sure thing. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificer nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostram quotidianum de nobis hodie, et demiti nobis demita nostra, sicut et nos demitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen. Okay, guys, it's been a pleasure. Like I said, it was nice meeting you in person or at
this
talking, Father James, and of course, John. It was nice seeing you again, as always. And yeah, I'm gonna have both of you back on, both together and individually, probably. And yeah, God bless, and stay. Well, I was gonna say stay warm, but I think you're in the South, right, Father?
I live in California right now in the San Francisco Bay Area. So wonderful, conservative, traditional place, But it's actually pretty warm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know both John and I are Canadians, so yeah, we come from opposite sides of the country, but
it's equally liberal.
It's
okay. No, you're in Alberta. You're better off.
All right, guys, signing off. God bless.
Peace.
Peace.